Hey, welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're going to dig into the story of the Pilgrims. But we're not just looking at it as a historical event. We're going to see it as this profound journey of faith told completely through the eyes of their governor, William Bradford.
Let's just dive right in by starting near the end of their sea voyage. Just listen to those words from Bradford. After everything they'd been through, this is the reality they faced. It's not a promised land, it's a hideous and desolate wilderness. They had no friends, no homes, nothing. Just a vast, terrifying unknown and their belief that God had brought them there for a reason.
So to really get why they would even attempt such a journey, you have to rewind. We've got to go back to England and understand what they were running from. This was never about getting rich. It was a desperate flight, and it was all driven by their religious convictions.
And this really gets to the heart of the conflict, doesn't it? On one hand, you have the separatists, that's the Pilgrims, who just wanted to worship according to the simplicity of the gospel. But on the other hand, you had the official Church of England, which they saw as this lordly and tyrannous power, full of ceremonies they felt were just leftovers from Catholicism, not from the Bible.
And this wasn't just some high-minded theological debate. Bradford quotes a preacher here who basically says that if you were serious about your faith back then, you became a target. You had to be ready for people to mock you, to injure you. Their own home had become hostile territory.
So, they decide they have to get out. But that decision, it leads them right into their first huge test of faith, a dangerous and, frankly, disastrous attempt to escape England and get to Holland, where there was more religious freedom.
So they pool their money, right? They hire a ship in secret. But the captain, a total betrayal. He takes their money, takes all their belongings, and then just hands them over to the authorities. They're arrested, paraded through the streets, and thrown in jail. It was an absolute catastrophe.
But here's the wild thing. For Bradford, this wasn't a failure. He saw God's hand in it. He believed that their public humiliation actually backfired on the authorities. He writes that their calm Christian behavior while being persecuted actually inspired people. Their cause became famous, and it drew even more people to their side. In their eyes, God had turned disaster into a victory.
All right, so after all that, they finally make it to Holland, and then they set sail for America. And that voyage on the Mayflower, man, it was like a series of trials all on its own. A perfect little snapshot of their whole struggle.
Okay, check this out. The first example of what they saw as God's providence. There was this one sailor on board who was just awful. Bradford describes him as proud and very profane. He would constantly curse and mock the Pilgrims for being seasick, telling them he couldn't wait to throw them overboard.
And then what happens? Bradford writes that this same guy is suddenly struck with a grievous disease and dies. He becomes the very first person to be thrown overboard. For the Pilgrims, this was no accident. It was a message. A clear and, as Bradford says, astonishing sign of God's justice.
Just when they think they've seen it all, a real disaster strikes. Right in the middle of a massive storm, one of the main wooden beams of the ship cracks. The whole vessel is threatening to just break apart in the middle of the Atlantic. It's a terrifying, life-or-death moment for everyone.
But the solution, this is just incredible. It turns out, completely by chance, or so you'd think, they happen to have this giant iron screw with them. Something they brought from a printing press in Holland. It was the one and only tool on the entire ship strong enough to push that massive beam back into place and save them all.
So they fix the beam. And again, you see their mindset, right? This wasn't just, wow, we got lucky. No, for them, this was God providing exactly what they needed when they needed it. He had sent the test, but he had also sent the tool for their salvation. Their faith was hardened. They were going to see this through.
Okay, so they survive the voyage, but when they finally arrive, their faith is about to face its toughest, most devastating test yet, that first brutal winter in the New World.
Bradford's description of their arrival is just chilling. Think about it. There's no one to welcome them, no shelter. They're sick, they're exhausted, and they're staring into this cold, harsh wilderness. Every single thing was against them.
And this number? It's just staggering. 50. Out of the 100 or so people who made it across the ocean, that's roughly how many were left standing after that first winter. They lost nearly half their people.
And it happened so fast. Bradford says that at its worst, they were losing 2 or 3 people a day. The few who were still healthy were spending all their time just trying to care for the dying and bury the dead. It's almost impossible to imagine.
But for those who made it through,
Well, this is where their faith was met with what they truly saw as a series of miracles. Signs that even after all that death, God hadn't abandoned them.
So, the first big problem is obvious: food. Spring is coming, but their seeds from England aren't really suited for the soil, and they have no idea what to plant or how to grow it. Starvation was the next logical step.
And then this happens. They're out exploring, and they stumble upon an abandoned Native American camp with buried baskets of corn. Now, you or I might call that a lucky break, but for Bradford, this was everything. He literally calls it a special act of God's care, God directly providing the very seeds they would need to survive.
And then comes what might be the most incredible act of providence of all. People. A Native American named Squanto, who miraculously speaks English, walks into their camp. He brokers a peace treaty with the local Wampanoag leader, Massasoit. And look at these terms. It's all about mutual respect, justice, and helping each other out. This treaty wasn't just a document. It was their lifeline.
So when you pull it all together, the persecution, the betrayal at sea, the storms, the starvation, the Pilgrims saw a pattern. They believed that all of this suffering was for a higher purpose, that it was all part of building the foundation for their new community.
And this really is the key to their whole worldview. They weren't there to be conquerors or adventurers. Bradford says they saw themselves as stepping stones. They were willing to endure all that hardship, to maybe even die, just so that others could come after them and build on the foundation they laid. Their suffering had meaning.
So, seeing their story through Bradford's eyes, through this constant lens of faith and divine intervention, it kind of leaves you with this big question, doesn't it? How do these foundational stories, these powerful narratives of trial, purpose, and faith, end up shaping the identity not just of a small community, but of an entire nation?